I spent hours of research and talking to the top players in the game to give you the best 5 decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! And in today's video, not only will I be breaking down how powerful those decks are, I'll actually be giving you the secret formula to be able to find out what deck can actually compete against those decks and why these decks are so amazing. Of course, big dog, as per usual, I'm going to be putting some personal deck lists on my Patreon as a special thank you for helping me pay my editors. Without further ado, let's jump on in. Bang! So one of the key secrets that I learned about some of the best decks in the game is that they aren't necessarily huge combo decks that take a million years to be able to play, but they also aren't decks that just set a couple of cards face down and end their turn. They're actually a mix of both, and this is what players typically call mid-range, a deck that can make some pretty amazing combos, but also can still survive on a few cards and control the game. Me personally, if I see a mid-range Yu-Gi-Oh deck, then I am all over it. It is literally the first choice, and that's actually surprising because Labyrinth is now a mid-range Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Labyrinth was once thought of as a back row or a stun type deck built on being able to stop your opponent with floodgates, but now because of the furniture cards being incorporated inside of the deck, it actually is a deck that plays in so many different ways. The irony about this is that even though Labyrinth, Stovey, Torby, and Chain Dragolier allow you to set trap cards to your deck, and Cuckoo Claw gives you a free activation on them, these particular trap cards that you're setting aren't necessarily oppressive cards to stop your opponent. It's actually the important cards that allow you to play Labyrinth, and this deck just actually has the benefit of being able to play on your opponent's turn even if they're going first. It's thanks to Enlarged by Arius the Labyrinth Butler, but another major change that some of the top Yu-Gi-Oh players have been talking about is using Arion, the other level 4. It allows you to be able to change those dead trap cards that you typically could be able to use into another monster, kind of like how Tour Guide would do for Unchained decks. And the fact that it can summon any level 4 or lower fiend monster from your deck makes the play lines infinite for this particular strategy. It's kind of crazy how not only those cards have changed the trajectory of Labyrinth, the deck is also really good right now because a lot of the hand effects that players are using don't really trade well against this deck. Commonly used hand effects like Infinite Impermanence and Effect Veiler aren't as strong against the Labyrinth deck as it would be against some of the others, as well as other popular cards like Nibiru and Drolling Logbird. Sheesh! You might as well just throw those cards in the trash when you playing against this deck. What's crazy about Labyrinth is that it's starting to feel less and less like a trap-based Yu-Gi-Oh deck that plays cards that players hate, and more like Unchained, which players might still hate. Ironically enough, after doing my research, Unchained is indisputably the most represented deck when it comes to top performances. It actually has the most regional and YCS tops throughout the entire format, so you could make a case to consider this as the best deck in Yu-Gi-Oh right now. And what's interesting about this deck is that it's eerily similar to Labyrinth. And ironically, not only does Unchained have its own Arion and Tour Guide to fetch fiends to the side of the field, it is reliant on its powerful trap cards to be able to remove your opponent's threats. But there are a couple of core differences between these decks, and even though they may share a lot of the same extra deck cards, Unchained is all about the extra deck, where Labyrinth isn't so much. Unchained is so ridiculously powerful because the deck is incredibly sticky. It can seem really frustrating breaking an Unchained player's board because you're triggering their effects of monsters like Unchained Soul Yama to special summon monsters back to their side of the field, and Solar Rage to be able to recur their resources. Age of Overlord also gave this deck some insane support with SP Little Knight and Star Crisis. These cards not only slot into Unchained incredibly well, they actually increase the power, making the deck harder to deal with. And another huge benefit of playing Unchained is not only being immune to hand effects, it's also being immune to searching, while also locking your opponent down from searching. Unchained is one of the very few decks that can play cards like Mistaken Arrest and not worry about it. This card is catastrophic against most Yu-Gi-Oh strategies because it prevents them from searching, but the double down on this to prevent your opponent from searching is that they've been using Sangan to search important hand traps like Drolling Logbird to completely shut your opponent down. Another thing to be able to determine if the deck is a top meta deck is not only does it have to be able to win inside of the grind game, it also has to have an amazing recovery. That's something that Rescue Ace easily has down packed and is signaled as the arch nemesis of the Unchained strategy. Rescue Ace is easily one of the best grinders because of Rescue Ace headquarters, allowing you to be able to shuffle even your banished Rescue Ace spell and trap cards. So even if a player were to use a card like DD Crow or Dimension Shifter later on in the game, this card will not only be able to keep them loaded, it also allows them to be able to grind. Once Rescue Ace gets started at any given time throughout the game, it is just one Rescue Ace Hydrant away for being able to get into a Rescue Ace Preventer or a Turbulence, which will be able to set those spell and trap cards back face down or continue on with some huge play. The biggest reason why players are using cards like Effect Veiler and Infinite Impermanence is because of Rescue Ace. When that Turbulence actually does get to set 4 spells and trap cards, it can almost seem like the game is over right there. You put that with Rescue Ace players cleverly find a way to synchro summon into a Brittle on the Floor and an SP Little Knight, it can almost seem impossible to beat them. Unfortunately for players relying just on that one card to be able to beat them, Rescue Ace players have been using Enemy Controller to be able to tribute their monster so they can gain the effect and still steal your monster. And another thing I've noticed Rescue Ace players doing to get another edge over a deck like Unchained is that they've actually been playing Yugioh the Festive Fox. This card is actually crazy against so many decks, but for example, for a deck like Unchained, when the Unchained player summons a monster like Shavara, that's when Yugioh comes down, and then it also special summons the Fire Barrier statue, which will prevent them from playing the game. It's ridiculously crazy how players have been able to innovate throughout the format to be able to stop some of the top decks. Rescue Ace keeps getting stronger. Now the last and most important rule to be a top meta Yu-Gi-Oh deck is that your strategy has to do something completely unfair if it goes first. Now, a lot of times in Yu-Gi-Oh, players are playing a ton of ways to be able to stop you from doing that, but that doesn't change that your deck still has to be able to do that if it goes uninterrupted. Centurion actually fits the whole criteria for this entire video. The first thing I want to say about Centurion is that it's filled with one-card combos. Just one card allows you to be able to make Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Calamity, meaning that the other cards in your hand can be just about anything. And you better believe it, some of the best Yu-Gi-Oh players in the entire game are taking full advantage of that. What players are doing right now is that not only are they mixing it with other engines to make the deck a lot less fragile, they also are playing some of the most powerful cards in the game, cards that will threaten you if you don't take care of them. The Bystial engine, the Horus engine, the Resonator engine, even a super heavy Samurai engine, this deck actually has endless opportunities to be able to make some really powerful boards and take advantage of some long forgotten and even some really good engines being used right now. And if that wasn't enough, we already know that Centurion is only getting stronger. It just came out in a deck build set, and historically, every single one of those deck build sets has gotten some support to make the deck way better. And I think another and one of the more important things that this deck has working for it is the ban list. Sure, there is a possibility for cards like Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Calamity to be banned, but that won't stop this deck from being a perennial contender for time to come. And speaking of grind decks, there's a new deck in town that players have been using. Bystial Runic is a deck that seemingly can grind forever. Bystial Runic is built in a couple of facets. You actually play a branded engine using Guiding Quim to be able to send Blazing Cartesia into your graveyard, and anytime you activate a Runic card, you just so happen to have a card leaving the extra deck to trigger Quim's effect. This actually gives you 2 level 4 tuner monsters to your side of the field, and very similar to Runic Naturia, it can make some really crazy synchro monsters, draw cards, and control the game with the Bystial monsters. Now personally, I am not completely sold on this strategy. The first is because it's a Runic strategy. You know how we feel about those. But next and more importantly, and I know this may sound a little biased, Top Deck TJ is playing the strategy, and normally when he plays a strategy, he's ass. The deck's ass too. I have been told by my producers that I cannot call this deck bad until I beat TJ in a duel with this deck. It happens Friday. I will admit one thing about the deck. Bystial Runic is a different take on a lot of strategies put together that actually looks pretty fun even though it's Runic. It also has to have some type of power to it. If it got first place at YCS Bologna, it probably could be here to stay. A couple of things to note if you want your deck to be a top level deck in this format is that it has to play through a bunch of disruptions. It also has to have a great grind game as well as some amazing recovery options. Also, if your deck has a ton of unfair interactions, your deck may be a top level Yu-Gi-Oh deck, so let me know what you guys have to say down below. And also be sure to check out these other videos so I can catch you on the next one.